programs, and of course, as well, there's a connection with the university and the health professions and any funding we provide there. So there's a couple of different areas. There isn't really a dental division, but it's mainly under public health and ancillary programs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe the minister can clarify. There's public health, and then there's a separate area called ancillary programs. Are they two separate? Can you give me an idea as to who the person is in charge of ancillary programs? Who's the person, the executive director?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that person would be Abe Almeida. He's the one who, the member's nodding his head. He's probably talked to Abe or met with him, in charge of ancillary programs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Does the minister, as a position, I mean, obviously she's not going to comment specifically on dental hygienists, obviously, or we'd have legislation before us to debate, but can the minister say whether her department has, as a policy, supports health professionals being able to be self-regulated? And secondly, in the case of dental hygienists, they are actually, it's required that they be supervised by a dentist, which in this day and age seems quite unusual. And I wonder if the minister would comment on whether she sees that as something in this day and age that's antiquated and should be changed.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we have looked at, supported the self-regulation of professions in the past. And I understand the point that the member is making about the supervision by the dentists. It's one of these areas of scope of practice that, well, it's a bit difficult to deal with because people like to guard their turf in the health professions, and it is an issue that Mr. Romano talked about, how there was going to have to be an attitude change if health reform were actually to take place, but attitude changes can take a couple of decades sometimes, so it won't be easy. When I said we're looking at omnibus legislation or umbrella legislation, we're looking at how we could accommodate all groups looking to have their own societies and self-regulate themselves, because there are so many branches now of health professions. And we're looking at is there a way that we could have legislation that could be adaptable enough to include most of them. And we're certainly not down to the fine print, but we're looking at a way that we're not going to come into the legislature with 20 different acts next fall. We'd like to be able to do better than that. So that's about where we stand on that right now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, as the member for our caucus, who has a tendency to be the one to read these things, I'll be glad if you can find a way to avoid 20 pieces of self-regulatory legislation. But Mr. Chair, I think we see already on the direct medical side, physiotherapists a few years ago, they changed the legislation so they don't need referral from doctors. Maybe in some ways doctors, medical doctors, have already begun to accept the requirement of other health professionals. And I wonder if dentists now are in a position where they need to have that same understanding. And sometimes that takes political will, obviously, from all parties. Given the role that dental hygienists can play, they were talking about smoking cessation, they were talking about obviously preventative, and as you noted in public health, they go out and into schools and into other facilities in order to educate people about the good oral hygiene. It seems very important that they be given a role to play, and one that isn't only supervised by a dentist. And I guess in my last question to the minister, before I hand it over to one of my colleagues, I would ask, is the minister prepared to recognize that even as we move forward in medical, in terms of oral hygiene and medicine generally, that is, as a bottom line, can she recognize that dental hygienists should be able to operate on their own without direct supervision from dentists?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think that that's still part of the discussion going on between dentists and hygienists. I'm told that actually the dentists in this province and the ophthalmologists in this province are somewhat more forward-looking on these issues than some in other provinces. I wouldn't be prepared to say at this point. The direction would be that the dental hygienist would be self-regulating to some degree, but I think the parameters, there'd have to be some parameters there for, what procedures could be done, and I don't think anyone would argue with that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Chair will recognize the member for Dartmouth North on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the Honourable Minister for allowing me to intervene, my colleague from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, and my colleague from Fairview for allowing me to intervene on such an introduction. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce in the East Gallery the NSGEU Civil Service Provincial Council, and they are Wanda Pulsifer, who is the chairperson, Roy LeBlanc, Susan Kidston, Carol Gadet, David Brewster, and Brad Crew. They are here in the gallery watching the proceedings, and they are also here to talk with the MLAs about the civil service issues such as the amendment to the Civil Service Collective Bargaining Act and the reinstatement of the Transition Support Program. And Mr. Speaker, I would hope that this House would give them a warm welcome.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd now like to turn to some fairly detailed financial questions. And it's going to be a little bit like pulling teeth. I thought I'd warn you about that in advance, but it's got to, somebody's got to do it, and it has to be done. Yeah. And the difficulty I have with the books that we're given as MLAs is they don't answer a lot of the most obvious questions. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with what the Department of Health is doing or the Department of Finance. They're producing the books in the same format that they've been produced for years. The problem is they give almost no information on very important questions. And sometimes if you hunt and hunt and hunt, you can, to coin a phrase, ferret out certain bits of information. But I've said it before and I'll say it again, MLAs, elected members of the legislature, should not have to hunt and hunt and hunt for important information. Now, I want to say again, I'm not suggesting the Department of Health is doing anything wrong. They're not. They're just producing this material the same way they have for years, but it's a $2.1 billion budget. And at the very least, it should be easy to follow the flow of money from one year to the next. Now, I've complained in this House before, especially after restructuring the government, how it was absolutely impossible, literally impossible, to compare the budget for one year to the budget for the following year. And that's no way to make public policy. So let me start with an easy one. In the last year-end forecast update for 2002-2003, there was an item for $11 million, which had a fancy name, but I'll refer to as a District Health Authority overspending. But it appears to have disappeared in this year's budget documents. So my first question to the Minister is, where is that $11 million line item in this year's budget? Where has it gone? And the twin question to that is a similar allowance being made for the 2003-2004 fiscal year?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. You mean does the member mean the deficit for the current year? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
I'm referring, Mr. Chairman, to the item referred to in the year-end forecast update, the last one with December 2002, that was called Consolidation and Accounting Adjustments for Government Service Organizations, Health Authorities Operations. And if the minister needs some help in figuring out which number I'm talking about, I'm going to send it over to her with one of the pages so that she can see exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you. If you could just give that right to the minister. So, Minister, I'm sending over the number, and if you could let me know where is that in the estimates, and has an allocation for that item been made in this year's budget?
Before I recognize the minister, is the member looking for this item to be tabled as well? Well, to simplify things, let's table the item and provide another copy for the minister. Can we do that? The honourable minister, the honourable minister of health, if we provide her with the document now, so she can reply if she wishes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's in the estimate book, page 1221. District health authorities. Why can't I find it?
Because he's looking at the total.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
Well, that can't possibly be it, Minister. That's not the figure that we're talking about. It can't possibly be right. What I'm going to do while the page is making copies, I'm going to move on to my next question, but I don't want to let this one go because this is an example of an item, an important item, $11 million item, that seems to have vanished from the estimates. And I just want to know where it is. And also, has an allocation for DHA overspending been made this year as well, since it was necessary last year? So I'd like to move on then. One of my other, I guess I'll call it my pet peeves, man. I have so many, it's hard to know where to start, but one of my other pet peeves about the estimates book is that everything is showing as a net figure. It's not shown as how much is being spent and then in a separate line item how much is being taken in. It's shown as a net amount. Now, I hasten to add again, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is it's just not very informative for those of us who are sitting here trying to make decisions about the government's budget when we don't have those numbers separated out. Because the department's budget this year is $2.1 billion, but as a matter of fact, the department's spending more than that. But we don't know how much more because we don't see the revenue numbers separated out anywhere, certainly not in any kind of detail that's useful. So let me start this part of the questioning with a high-level question. What is the gross departmental expenditure this year, not counting any revenue that's coming into the department?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, we'd have to get back to them on that because we have recoveries built in all the way through the estimate book, and we'd have to, take all the recoveries out everywhere, and that would be it would be very time consuming. We can certainly do it, but it, for every health authority, for every travel expense paid for by the federal government, for example, we'd have to take all the recoveries out, and all the way through. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax Fairview.
I'll have to respectfully disagree with the minister. It's not that complicated. It's not that big a deal. Somewhere in the Department of Health, that budget already exists. It has to exist. I mean, the department couldn't do its job if it didn't know what its gross expenditure was and if it didn't know as a separate item what the revenue is. All we know here in the legislature is it's reported as a net figure. So somebody in the Department of Health has it right on their desktop, either their computer desktop or their actual literal desktop, the figures that I'm looking for, and all I'm looking for as a member of this legislature is that information. I know it exists. It has to exist. It would be crazy to expect that it doesn't exist. And all I'm asking for is if the minister will table it in this House. Another way of getting at this would be to ask for the minister if she would table an itemized list of departmental revenues. An itemized list of departmental revenues. Is that possible?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we certainly can, provide a list of all the recoveries, and we can provide the information that member from Halifax Fairview is asking for. But our Chief Financial Officer will need the time to go back to his office and get that information in order to supply it to the member here, probably tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tomorrow would be wonderful. I accept tomorrow. Tomorrow would be great. I know that's not a promise. That's not a promise. It's the department will attempt to provide it by tomorrow, but my golly, getting information out of this government one day is something I gladly accept, since it's not something we usually see. Usually we get dragged kicking and screaming through the FOI process for months and months, and in some cases years. So if the minister says she'll deliver that information in a day, I say great. Great, that would be a nice change. One of the other items that I think members of the legislature should be able to see and identify easily are the difference between recurring payments and one-time only payments. Payments that will not recur in the following fiscal year. And every department has some of these. There may be a grant that's just made once. As opposed to, say, the pharmacare budget, where you know that the pharmacare budget, what they pay for, recurs year after year after year. But there are many items in every department's budget that are one-time only payments. And I wonder if the minister has a list of one-time payments, that is, payments that will not recur in the following year, and if the minister can provide that list.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, Mr. Chair, it can be done, but it is very time-consuming, and I couldn't make that commitment by tomorrow. Every vendor code would have to be checked to make sure that it wasn't something that had occurred in a previous year or a year before that, to make sure it actually was a one-time payment as opposed to, 2 or 3 time or whatever. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax Fairview.
I'm not asking for anything difficult. I'm not asking for something that the department shouldn't already have. I'm not asking the department to go through every vendor code. I'm looking for what accountants would call material payments, whatever that is in the Department of Health. Material payments, so in other words, very large payments that will not recur the following year. And I know the department knows this, because you can't do any kind of planning in a $2 billion department without knowing which part of your budget is going to occur again next year and which part is not. You can't possibly plan without knowing those things. And so, again, I can't agree with the minister. What I'm asking for is going to be terribly difficult. I'm not looking for reams of paper, listing item by item, like every $2 expense report that's not going to recur. I'm looking for material items so that I, as a member of the legislature, can have a better handle on this department's budget. Because this minister is asking this legislature to approve spending of over $2.1 billion. And I would think the least the department can do is provide fairly quickly and easily material items that are one-time only payments. So the minister said she'll produce it when she can, but I don't want the minister going away thinking that I'm asking for something difficult or impossible that's going to take, hundreds of hours of staff time. I'm asking for something that has to be there already, because I can't imagine how the department does its planning if it doesn't know already which payments aren't going to recur. Another item that is not clear, this is one you really have to hunt for. You can probably discover it if you really hunt very, very carefully through the budget. And you shouldn't have to. I shouldn't have to, Mr. Chairman. You shouldn't have to. No member of the legislature, no member of the public should have to hunt for items from the department's budget that have been transferred to other departments. Some of the department's budget has been transferred to the Office of Health Promotion. Some of the department's budget has been transferred over to the Department of Education. Something that probably most people don't realize is that part of the increase in funding for post-secondary education this year isn't new money, it's just money taken from the Department of Health and moved over into education. So it's not new money, nothing new is being bought with the money, it's the same thing being bought, it's just moved from one department to another, but it's included in the amount by which the government claims it has increased post-secondary education. Well, how do you like that, Mr. Chairman? It's good if you can get away with it. But at any rate, can the minister list specifically which items from the department's budget last year have been transferred to other departments this year? Which items and how much?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and we can certainly provide, a list of what got transferred over to health promotion and what got transferred. Either you're looking for things that were transferred from the Department of Health as opposed to the Department of Health, and.
Two items.
Just two?
That got transferred to education and...
Yes. The Dalhousie a School of Nursing, $1.7 million transferred to the Department of Education. We had funding to the Office of Health Promotion of $7.043 million. And we can...
That's a transfer from.
And that is the major transfer from. The breakdown of what was transferred to the Office of Health Promotion is not a problem to provide. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll assume that since the minister's list stopped at those points, that those are the only material transfers from the department. I'm assuming that the minister is not just giving me examples, but that is in fact the complete list. And the minister is nodding her head, so I'll take that as a yes. I'd like to turn to, and the minister will have to excuse me if she's answered this previously, but I'm going to ask again on page 12.12 of the supplementary detail estimates. The budget for other programs has gone from a forecast of $10.4 million to $17.3 million, almost a $7 million increase under the unhelpfully titled line item Other Programs. So I wonder if the minister could enumerate what are those other programs that are being funded to the tune of $7 million.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And mental health, early identification, autism, $1.9 million. That was a new program.
It's increase in spending.
Increase of spending. We have wage increases in the ICONS project. We have $375,000 for children with complex care needs. We have a home care arthritis grant for $150,000. We have a transfer of the Multiple Sclerosis Society grant from Grants and Assistance. Senior Citizens Secretariat operational and wage increases. And we have a couple of things in here, Mr. Chair, with initials on that I've never seen before in my life, and I'll have to get back to you with what exactly they mean when I have them translated into English. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It would be very helpful if the minister could table the written list rather than trying to read out $150,000 at a time, how it adds up to $7 million. I know the minister and/or her department have that list somewhere, and it would be very helpful if the minister could actually list that.
Order, please. Order, please. Thank you. The member for Halifax Fairview has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, I'd like to move to page 12.21 of the supplementary detail. And this may, I say may because it's impossible to know just by looking at it, this may circle back to the question that I started with. There's a line item there worth $28.5 million. It's actually $28.5 million is counted to the good. It's on the revenue side. And it's called Consolidation and Accounting Adjustments for Government Service Organizations. So my question to the minister is simple. It's what is that? What is that item?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm unclear at what the member is looking at exactly. I would like to answer the question, but is it a part of the Health Department estimates that he's looking at? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
Does the minister have the supplementary detail book? The minister says yes. I'm looking at page 12.21. 12.21. And I'm looking at the fourth item in the right-hand column on page 12.21, $28.5 million. And my question to the minister is simply, what is that? And while the minister's looking, maybe I'll reiterate my complaint that when you have a line item in a government budget for $28.5 million, you shouldn't have to guess what it is. You shouldn't have to, and I'm not saying the minister's doing anything wrong. The minister's doing what ministers have done since time began. But maybe it's about time that we rethought this. When you're talking about $28.5 million, it should be clear to everybody in this legislature what that is. So now I've finished my whining. Back to the minister. What is that item?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And what that is it's in the item to do with capital grants. We have capital grants for hospital infrastructure totaling $30 million. And the adjustment has to do with the amount of amortization. So it's reflecting back, 28.5 because it's consolidating and the accounting adjustment is the amortization. That's the simple answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So you were going from the cash to
Member for Halifax Fairview.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm confused, which is a state that I'm getting used to being in looking at this budget. Because in the year-end forecast update, the very same item, which is called, again, rather unhelpfully, Consolidation and Accounting Adjustments for Government Service Organizations, is is a payment to cover overspending by the district health authorities. And now, the very same item, under the very same words, here the minister is now telling me is amortization. How can you have two items described in the same way in two different documents issued 4 months apart that apparently mean such radically different things? How is it, so my question to the minister, how on earth is an ordinary MLA supposed to make any sense of this?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm told that there are a lot of entries called consolidation entries, and this one here under capital grants, it's simply it's showing money in and money out, like the diagnostic and medical equipment fund of $15 million, hospital infrastructure 30, then the medical equipment fund out again. This is an accounting procedure. The member opposite knows very well I'm not an accountant, but I am here to answer for the estimates. And what I'm saying in this particular case is that the 28.5 reflects amortization of capital costs in this year. And this is, one of the things that you see going from, one type of accounting system to another type of accounting system. And he knows that very well. And it is unfortunate that things are titled the same, but in the forecast update, he's right, the same, phrase is used to talk about the hospital deficits, but that's not what we're talking about here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
Okay, let me then, Mr. Chairman, circle back to where I started, because the minister wasn't able to answer the question without looking at the document I provided to her. In the December 20th, 2002 year-end forecast update, there's an extraordinary item of $11 million for District Health Authority overspending. Try as I might, I can't find that item in this year's budget. Can the minister tell me where is it, and has any allocation been made for the same line item in this year's budget?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
All districts have to be.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair. We have the deficits for the districts in each district. In order to get the update on the $11 million item the member is referring to, we have to go through the statements and add up the deficits for each district. But they are there, but they're just accounted for separately in each district. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax Fairview.
Okay, so let me just make sure that I understand this. In December 20th, today's the 14th of April, so less than 4 months ago, the government reports an item this way. And if I understand the minister correctly, if I want to find that same figure, I have to go through the estimates book, district by district, and add up the deficits, because now they're reporting it differently. Well, I'm not going to do that, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I should have to do that. As a member of the legislature, I think it should be obvious to me on the face of the documents, without having to hunt through the documents. Let me ask the minister this, because I refuse to hunt for figures. It should be right there. What was the total deficit incurred by the DHAs last year?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Chair, the total deficit for the DHAs last year was about $17,400,000. I would like to make the point that we did report the deficits for each district in the same way last year as we are doing this year. They were reported individually, and that the line from the financial statements issued by the finance minister or his updates, are not mimicked in the estimates book. That, in point of fact, that our estimates book is, in terms of how the DHA's spending, budgeting, and spending is presented, are the same this year as last year. And that deficit represents about 1.5% of the budget. That's 17.4. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax Fairview.
I've said it before, Mr. Chairman, I'll say it again. I'm not being, although it sounds like I am, I'm not really being critical of the minister and her department. This is the way this kind of thing has been reported for a long time. It's just not good enough. It's just not good enough for us to do our job. It's time that we rethought these estimate books that are presented to the legislature. Anyway, let me move on then to the question of DHA deficits. Now, I may be wrong. I'm not my party's health critic, and I may have forgotten or overlooked something. But is it not the case that DHAs are actually by law forbidden to run deficits? It's actually illegal for a DHA to run a deficit. Is that not correct?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, the DHAs are not allowed or supposed to plan for deficits, but a deficit can be approved or not approved, depending on, how and why it was incurred. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax Fairview.
Okay, so here we have a situation. It's illegal for a DHA to budget for a deficit. But the provincial government doesn't actually give them enough money to do their jobs, which is why at the end of a full year we have a deficit, accumulated deficit of $17.4 million. So that later in the year, just like last year, let's remember what happened last year. In December of '02, the government reported that the DHAs would run a deficit of $11 million, even though running a deficit is illegal. Or no, planning a deficit is illegal. That is, actually writing down in your budget that you're going to run a deficit is illegal. Even though most of the DHA CEOs would have known from day one that they couldn't do their job on the money they were being given. Yeah, that's part of the fiction around health budgeting this year. But I'm not sure that there's any reason for us to believe that exactly the same thing isn't going to happen this year, that by the time we get to December, we'll find that the DHAs have overspent by $10, $11, $15 million, and that by the time we get to the end of the fiscal year, we'll probably find that they've overspent, just like last year, by $17.4 million. See, the government doesn't have to account for that now, because going into an election, all they care about is that they're showing a surplus. It doesn't matter what size it is, showing a surplus, and it doesn't matter, they don't have to let reality impinge on that. And one of the realities of the health system is the DHAs haven't been getting enough money to do their job. That's why they run deficits. So my question to the minister is, why should any Nova Scotian believe that exactly the same thing is not going to happen this year, and that by December we'll know that our DHAs are running deficits again? Why shouldn't we believe that?
The Honourable Minister of Health, there's just over 4 minutes remaining in this hour.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, the department is constantly working with the DHAs to try to see where their funding gaps are. We, know in some instances that there may be deficits. We don't plan for them, and we try to work to reduce them. I think that the member knows that there have been much bigger deficits in the past, that 2 years ago the deficits were about $42 million. We are working very hard to try to bring the increases in health spending, both in the districts and that spending under our own authority, to be at least predictable and sustainable as much as possible. That's one of the reasons that we've worked out this a multi-year funding plan on the non-staff costs of 7%. And we're constantly going through this business planning process. It seems like we're going through it all year long to try to see where we can accommodate the district's request for new projects and new services, and how we can afford them. It's true what the member from Halifax Fairview was saying about perhaps a government not funding enough, but enough gets to be so big an amount of money. And what we're working to do is to fund enough, but not overspend or overfund, because we work very hard to try to prevent cost overruns. They cannot always be helped, but we're always trying to keep the increases within control. And although we don't like the districts to have deficits, we do think that the situation has improved considerably over the last number of years. And this deficit is relatively small compared to the amount of money that the districts are dealing with. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax Fairview.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't hear any words of comfort to think that the DHAs won't do exactly what they did last year, and that is run a deficit. But but this government doesn't much care about that, because right now it's all about timing. It's all about timing, and they know they're not going to have to account for this until after the election. But it's just something. It's just one of those big multi-million-dollar hits that the new government is going to have to deal with. And the Liberals say they'll deal with it when they're in government. Well, I did have another question, but in the mudslinging coming from either direction here, Mr. Chairman, the last question I had for the minister just seems to have slipped my mind. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll pass it over to my friends and colleagues in the Liberal Party.
I recognize the member from Clare. It is now 6:41.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to continue with local mental health concerns for the Tri-County area. I guess my first question to the minister, could the minister tell the committee how much funding is being budgeted for mental health with the Southwest Nova District Health Authority?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In that district, $2.8 million, Mr. Chair. 2.871.2 to be precise.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering, would the minister agree, and I don't suspect she has that information, that detailed information with her, but would the minister agree in providing us with a list of where this $2.8 million funding has been spent on?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And certainly we can do that. We'd have to go to the district to get that because we don't maintain that level of detail, but it won't be a problem to provide a breakdown of that spending. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the minister's commitment. Earlier this afternoon, in previous questioning, the minister was indicating that for the Tri-County area, which looks after Digby, Yarmouth, and Shelburne County, our area, Mr. Chairman, is currently being served by one psychiatrist. I'm just wondering what happens to funding that hasn't been spent on providing mental health services for the people in the Tri-County area. What happens to that remaining funding?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that funding can't be transferred to other services. It would have to be used in the way it is dedicated. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the minister earlier undertook to provide us with a list of where the $2.8 million funding is being spent, I'll wait to get that information. I guess, before I move on to my next topic, I guess my final question on mental health. I'm wondering, Minister, when can we expect to see a plan from your department to address the delivery of mental health services for rural Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the standards that we announced this winter are designed to encompass the entire province. The announcement to do with the teams in Halifax or the metro area and the Sydney metro area are one thing, but the plan of the mental health standards and treatment are meant to encompass the whole of Nova Scotia. And as this rolls out over time, funding, will increase over the next. The cost of achieving these standards is going to be about $17 million, and staff in the department have worked very hard on this plan, and they believe it is a very good plan. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the Minister might agree that the $17 million plan is a great plan, but I can tell you the people of Digby, of Yarmouth, and Shelburne County, that's currently being served by one psychiatrist. Mr. Chairman, we used to have 6 or 7 psychiatrists over the years. I can tell you this plan that the Minister is talking about is not working down for the people of the western end of this province. So, I agree, there has to be standards province-wide, but what I'm looking for is there a plan that will address the need to provide mental health services for people more or less in rural Nova Scotia, and mainly in western Nova Scotia, I guess.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, Mr. Chair, the plan and the standards are not just for certain parts of the province. They're for all parts of the province. But the member from Clare knows that we just made this announcement this year. We did just provide the funding this year, and it will take a number of years for this plan to be successful, and it will have to continue to be funded, and it will have to continue to be refined. And I realize the member's frustration that there aren't enough mental health services in his area, but there aren't really enough mental health services in any area of the province, and that's one of the things that we're looking to improve, and certainly not just in Metro or in Cape Breton, but all over the province, but it will take time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Mr. Chairman, as the Minister knows, and as every one of us understands, we can bring more money into the mental health budget, but more funding's not going to fix every problem. Part of the problem right now is we're finding a shortage of resources to help people, to provide them with the resources in order to look after the mental health service in this province. So I don't know if the department or the province has a plan into trying to recruit these resources to our province, or if they have no plan. But I think just in terms of putting more money, I don't think money's going to do it in the end. I think we need to certainly have a plan to help try to recruit or attract medical professions to many parts of this province. And I guess my final question to the Minister on mental health services, is the department looking at putting a plan together and helping many communities throughout this province in attracting the proper resources to help with the delivery of the mental health services?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I absolutely agree with the member from Clare that throwing money at a problem is not going to solve it. But in a lot of cases, the money that you're putting towards a program is the money you're putting towards people. And I mean some of the health professionals that are needed to provide some of the kinds of service that we want to give. Part of the reason that the people in the department who work in the mental health field are excited about some of these new projects is because it will allow them to work on different models of care that won't always involve just a psychiatrist. It will involve psychiatrists, but it will also involve other health professionals, including social workers, for example. And that is part of what everybody wants in terms of trying to, reform the healthcare system, is how we can do things differently. And that's what we're trying to achieve here with the approach of these teams. And as I said, the new approved payment schedules for the psychiatrists should help with the issue of recruiting more psychiatrists. That is a different pot of money than what we're talking about here for the mental health standards and teams. And it may seem like just throwing money at a problem, but not when you do have a plan for what the programs should be and what the models are that you're trying to achieve for care. I mean, we do know we need more psychiatrists. To attract more psychiatrists, we're going to have to pay higher wages than we paid in the past. And, that requires money. It's not throwing money at a problem, it's finding money to pay the people you need to look after the patients who need the care. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I indicated to the minister earlier, Friday I checked their web page in positions available and positions they were trying to attract medical doctors. I noticed, especially in the Tri-County area, the Department of Health had only one opening available for one psychiatrist. Could the minister indicate to the committee why the department feels there's only a need to recruit one additional psychiatrist for the Tri-County area?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the agreement with the psychiatrists is very, very recent, and we know that we're going to be adding at least, or trying to add, at least 12 to 15 psychiatrists, or attract them to practice in Nova Scotia. So the list on the website is going to change. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to move to the press release that the Southwest Nova District Health Authority put out on March 21st, 2002, and I tabled a copy of this press release earlier this afternoon. Among the, it said that, first of all, with approval from the Department of Health, the DHA indicated in order to make up their $1.8 million shortfall projected for their 2002-2003 business plan, they would have to...
Mr. Chairman, point of order. I'd like to call for quorum count.
Quorum count. Thank you. I count 14 members. I believe in the Committee of the Whole House on Supply, it's 9 members is quorum. I check with the clerk on that. It's 9 members, so there is quorum. Order. 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 The member from Clare, are you, you're still speaking. Member from Clare.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, going back to the press release that was issued by the Southwest Nova District Health Authority back in March of 2002, they indicated that they had received approval from the Department of Health, and they would have to make up $1.8 million shortfall projected in their 2002-2003 business plan. part of that, there were a number of initiatives that the DHA brought forward, and among those, there was one. They were looking at instituting paid parking at all 3 hospitals in the district. That parking would now be collected or paid for at the Roseway Hospital, at the Yarmouth Regional Hospital, and at the Digby General Hospital. I guess my first question to the Minister, if she could provide us with how much has been collected at all 3 sites.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I believe I said earlier that we would provide all the information that we had on parking revenues in the various districts. And so certainly we go to the district and see what they've collected in parking revenues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the Minister for her commitment in providing that information to the committee. I wasn't here if that question had been raised. My next question is, would the Minister also indicate to us, when she does table that information, the actual cost to set up these parking lots at all 3 sites?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And there were setup costs, obviously, not necessarily extensive, but we can also get those. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Mr. Chairman, one question that has been brought to my attention is looking at the Digby General Hospital. You know, right next door to the Digby Hospital, there's a big parking lot in front of the mall. Right next door to the hospital, there's a local drugstore parking lot. I'm just wondering if the DHA will raise enough money with the parking at the Digby Hospital to help pay for the setting up costs for the Digby Hospital. So maybe when the Minister does table that information, we'll be able to see if there is actually a chance for the DHA, for the department, to actually collect the amount that was spent in setting up these parking lots. Mr. Chairman, I'm wondering if the Minister could indicate to the committee if there's any talks, there's certainly some rumors out there, but if there's any talks between her department and our DHA to raise the parking fee this year.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, that was not proposed in the business plan for the DHA. So I doubt very much that's the case. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, looking at this new parking fee, many seniors and many individuals living on fixed income find this new hospital parking fee nothing more than a hidden tax. I'm just wondering, is the government looking at providing a rebate or some type of refund or a discount to these individuals living on fixed income?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm certain that it works in a very similar way in all the DHAs, in that if there's a hardship case, or it's a case where someone is coming to visit someone in a long-term care bed every day or every couple of days, that there are cases in which individuals can be given passes or exemptions from the parking fees, or some way in which to ameliorate a particular hardship situation. I think everyone working in the healthcare field knows that there are instances where if a person has to be there every day or twice a day with a patient and the person doesn't have the means, that the hospital and the DHAs are not trying to gouge people. They're trying to get a form of cost recovery that they think is reasonable, and if there's a reasonable case for a person to be exempted, they'll be exempted. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my next case, speaking of hardship case, it's probably more to address a specific need. Mr. Chairman, in Clare, we have a transportation service that has been in place or in operation for 7 years now. It's called the Transport de Clare. This service is provided by a group of volunteers. It's a transportation service provided mainly to people with disabilities, to seniors, and others who needs help. Just speaking recently with one of the organizer of the Transport de Clare, he indicated to me that currently they have 2 clients that have to go to on the dialysis 3 times a week at the Yarmouth Regional Hospital. I know the Transport de Clare has been trying to get free parking at the hospital for some time now. Even as we speak, they still have not received free parking from the DHA. I'm wondering if it would be possible for the minister to help them with their requests in requesting free parking for this volunteer organization that's providing free transportation services to individuals from our area.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And certainly, Mr. Chair, we can undertake to talk to the CEOs about all their policies for free parking or not free parking and look at this particular case. I can't commit to change their decision because they are set up to manage their own affairs, but I'll certainly ask about it. Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, looking at the list of initiatives that were approved by the Department of Health, there was a $50,000 budget item here listed for alternate funding for Roseway Hospital Switchboard night shift. As I understand, Mr. Chairman, this service was provided at night by the switchboard at the Shelburne Hospital for local firefighters. I guess my question would be, has the DHA been successful in finding this alternate funding?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that is funding that the department did provide to the DHA. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If maybe the minister could indicate to us, the department did provide that $50,000 to the Southwest Nova District Health Authority. Is it the intention of the department, once again, to provide that same level of funding for 2003-2004?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's part of their ongoing base. So it's being provided again this year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the minister for her response. Again, looking at the press release again, there was another budget item, emergency department charges. Mr. Chairman, these new fees were being charged to individuals that needed to go to the emergency departments. Such fees were for casts, drugs, for starter doses, as I understand, for collars, slings, braces. I will table a list of these were called take-home supply charges. Once I'm done, I'll table this for the committee. I guess my question, has the Southwest District Authority, have they been successful in collecting this projected amount of $150,000?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and we'd have to get back to the committee on that level of detail, so we'll add that to the list. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
I guess the first question that comes to mind, Mr. Chairman, we all know of individuals, unfortunately, that have limited income. These individuals certainly do have to go, I'm sure, at times at emergency departments at the hospitals. And the fact that sometimes you don't have money with you to pay for these extra costs or these extra supplies that people are provided with in the emergency department. I'm wondering, is it a department's policy or a DHA policy that when supplies are provided to individuals that can't afford them, that they are provided free? Or maybe let's try with that one first.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I don't think that, if personnel are told that a person, can't afford these things, that they would be treated harshly or made, to pay for things they truly can't afford. But what we're talking about here, obviously, is not something that is supplied in the hospital when you go into the emergency ward for treatment. It would be to do with take-home supplies. And sometimes it's easier for people. I mean, and they're not always very expensive, but it's easier for people to be able to buy them in the hospital as opposed to, make a trip to the drugstore, an extra trip to get these hospital supplies. Or not hospital supplies, but supplies for home after being in the hospital. And, I'll check on the policy, but I think the member knows that not all supplies can be provided to everyone at all times free of charge because they cost. But in terms of being treated in the emergency ward and having a cast put on, you don't have to pay for the cast. But you may need certain kinds of bandages, and, at one time, perhaps everything, was given to people, and perhaps it's less so now. But I don't think a case of true hardship would be denied by the people in the hospital. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to hear the minister indicating that services certainly will not be denied. But, I'm just looking at this list, take-home supplies charges. The Southwest Nova District Health Authority in March of 2002 indicated these initiatives that were approved by the Department of Health. There was one budget item here, emergency department charges. They were planning and raising $150,000. So I guess my question, I want to make sure that people were not denied services. I guess my final question to the minister, if individuals don't have the money with them in order to pay for the supplies that they take home with them, are they provided with a bill or a cost that they have to pay the hospital at a later date?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, Mr. Chair, the Department of Health, doesn't manage the day-to-day affairs of the health authorities. So we'd have to get back with that particular kind of detailed information. We'd have to have a lot more than 600 employees were we to manage that level of detail in the district health authorities. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, with the list of initiatives that the Southwest Nova District Health Authority provided to the minister for approval, that they had to make up the difference for $1.8 million. I would like to know, has the the DHA been able to raise these amounts as they stated on their press release of March 21st, 2002?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that DHA is running, or this year ran a deficit of about 700,000. So it was able to make up a good portion of the cost, but was not able to make up them all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I understand that our local DHA ran a deficit of $700,000 for year 2002-2003. My next question, will the Southwest Nova District Health Authority will they have to make up the difference for this deficit that they ran into 2002-2003?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, the province is picking up the deficit, so they'll be starting off clean. And I would point out that I think that all the DHAs, and this one in particular, have done an excellent job of managing their deficits. It's on its own, it seems like a large amount, but in a total budget of about $50 million, it's really excellent financial management. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to hear that the Minister has indicated that our DHA will not be responsible to carry their deficit of $700,000 in the upcoming year, 2003-2004. Will the department carry, is it a policy that the department has that if a DHA finishes the year with a deficit, automatically the department absorbs or will I guess accept the deficit for any DHAs as far as that's concerned?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And no, it's not automatic by any means. Obviously, you work through the year, or the Associate Deputy works very closely throughout the year, and Byron to try to help manage costs and find ways either to, cut costs or find some way of making recoveries. There's no automatic assumption of deficits. The Minister has to approve, and actually the Cabinet has to approve as well if there's going to be a deficit. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That completes my questions for the Minister this evening. For the remaining of our time, I think we have, maybe you could indicate to us how much time we have left?
Yeah, a little over 9 minutes remaining.
We have 9 minutes left. The honourable member from Cape Breton Nova will continue with our questioning. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Cape Breton Nova with 9 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just discussing the issues of the day with my good friend from Cape Breton Centre when you came to my rescue. So I thank you. Now, Mr. Chairman, I'm told there's only 9 minutes left, which is hardly enough time to get warmed up. But I was thinking that it was good to speak for 9 minutes, maybe for an opener, on the subject of health and how good it is to be healthy and how bad it is to be unhealthy, as demonstrated by the many acts of this government. So perhaps on that theme I can make a few variations. No, as I was saying the last time I spoke on these estimates, Mr. Chairman, there's a great deal of unease where I come from about the future state of our health institutions in that area. Now, we face the same problems in health that we face in education and generally because of the downturn of employment caused by the double closure of the two basic industries we had, namely coal and steel. You know, how much money do I make? That has nothing to do with what happened to the steel and coal industries. I'll tell you, that's irrelevance, Mr. Chairman. You should rule that comment out of order. But in any event, In any event, we lost the coal and then we lost the steel, and as a result of that, we lost all kinds of children, and so our education system is in a free fall down, and we lost all kinds of hospital patients, and so I suppose there's also a downturn there. Perhaps fewer beds are required. I don't know. I remember a time, Mr. Chairman, when there were 4,500 people working at the Sydney Steel Plant. That was in 1974. Under the Reagan government, I heard somebody over there say, and they're right. On that irrelevance, I'll support them. It was under the Reagan government. 4,500 people working at an institution where today, I don't have an up-to-date employment list. I know there's Alfie, and there may be some others in the office. And out on the grounds, there are people that patrol, they're security types. And there are also demolition workers working, tearing the place down for Zoom. Wake up, Mr. Minister. Zoom. Is that right? Yes, Zoom. Developments of India that want to take the steel plant apart, put it on boats to India, and when they arrive at Calcutta, or wherever they arrive, they're going to put the thing back together again. Just like a mechano set. Did you have a mechano set when you were a boy? It was all kinds of little steel rods and parts and little screws, and you could put them together and make something, and then you could take it apart. Well, that's exactly what Zoom, as motivated by this government, intends to do to our steel plant. Now, how does that affect our healthcare delivery system? Well, the answer is that there's fewer people working, and so there's fewer dollars around. But there's also fewer people that get sick, because so many have moved away, because there was no jobs in Cape Breton. They had to go out to Alberta or some such place. So all this is affecting the future of the Glace Bay Hospital, the New Waterford Consolidated Hospital, the Northside General Hospital, and I suggest the final analysis, the bottom line, the Cape Breton Regional Hospital, because that's the foundation on which all these other hospitals come from, I guess. Now, we've had problems in New Waterford. Should I tell them about Dr. Atiyah, or do you want to go on that one? No, you go ahead. All right. Well, Dr. Atiyah, I believe he's from Egypt, was the first plastic surgeon to ever locate in Cape Breton. First one in history. Obtained by the Liberal government of Russell McCulloch. And they needed a place to put his clinic, and there was space available in the New Waterford Hospital, so Dr. Atiyah came to New Waterford and did his plastic surgery there. Now, what is the future of the plastic surgery operation in industrial Cape Breton? Well, there have been problems. If I had more time, Mr. Chairman, I'd get into them. But I'm sure my good friend from Cape Breton Centre can fill the breach when my 7 minutes have run out, if not today, tomorrow, and tell you about Dr. Atiyah. There have been problems in the emergency department at the New Waterford Consolidated Hospital and in Glace Bay as well, and at the Northside Hospital, all three. The problems are generally about the same, but there are differences from hospital to hospital. For example, you'll find that doctors doing emergency duty in New Waterford are not being paid the same wage for doing it that is paid in Sydney. So if you pay a doctor twice as much to do the work in Sydney as in New Waterford, guess where they're going to want to work? I rest my case on that one. Mr. Chairman, I have a file. It's bigger than this file here, and that's just some of the work I brought up for my constituency to do while I'm up here in Halifax this week doing nothing, as they say. I have a file bigger than that on the one hospital in New Waterford about all the problems that they faced there over the last number of years. It includes, yes, some of the good things that were done under the Liberal government to make those problems better. But since the Tories got in, instead of the upward swing continuing, it's plateaued off and then now once again going down. There is a great level of public concern on this. There was a mass meeting held in New Waterford only a few Sundays ago. I regret that I wasn't there because I was on my way up here. You have to travel sometimes in this job. But the hall was filled. The hall was filled, and at least one of our members was there. I'm not trying to make commercials for my colleague from the other party, but he was there. 2 nights. Well, he's got lots to say then to keep these health care estimates under very close scrutiny for at least 1 hour, I should think, I should hope. So, how much time do I have left, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman?
The member has 3.5 minutes remaining.
Well, maybe I can move around to Glace Bay for a minute then, because there are great concerns in Glace Bay. Ads appearing in the newspaper, Dr. So-and-so will no longer be in practice. News write-ups saying the same thing. Physicians leaving, not being replaced. Emergency department closed down. Future of the emergency department in Glace Bay right now, here's the honourable member for Glace Bay. He can tell us all about it. He sure will, he says. Well, I rest my case. If the member from Glace Bay is here, he can tell the tale for Glace Bay. Now, I don't actually have any hospital in my constituency, not even with the new boundaries. I have the site of the former Sydney City Hospital. No, I don't. It's on your side of the street. All right. But I'll say that there are hospitals in action that serve the people that I represent on both sides, on this side and on that side. So we got lots of hospitals that we can talk about. Now, I see the deputy clerk is waving his hand at me to climb up. But my time is just coming to an end. I know that, Mr. Chairman, I know that. If I had more time too, all right. No, that was Churchill's sign of victory. That's what that one meant. Victory, yes. If I had more time, I could get into the North Side General and all the problems they have over there, and every health care facility, it seems, that we're in contact with. They are having problems. Now, our government, when it was in power, did a great deal to try to make the health care in Cape Breton better. You give me more than 2 minutes, and I can start telling you about that.
Give him another hour.
Well, there may be another hour coming. But I must say that this government now stands to be judged on their record since 1999. Did they continue the good work underway by the Russell McClellan Liberal government? No, they did not. Did they turn their back on that good record? Yes, they did. Yes, they did. They turned their back on that good record, both in health and in education and in every other subject you care to mention, and then some. It's not been a very good record. I am not reassured, Mr. Chairman, by the $155 check that I'm going to get in June. Now, I may have spent it already, but that's another story. Give it to the Crown. Well, I raised the suggestion in the House the other day of give it to the Liberal Party. Now you're giving me the one-finger signal. Give that $155 to the Liberal Party. And if enough people do that, we'll have enough money to be able to beat that crowd and take them right out of office. In fact, Mr. Chairman, we can put them right down here where they started from, in third place. So I think that's a worthy project to devote a full hour to the next time we get a turn at bat. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. No, that's okay. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I move that your committee do now rise, report considerable progress, and beg leave to sit again on a future date.
Chairman, on the Committee of the Whole House on Supply reports.
The committee has met, made considerable progress, and begs leave to sit again.
Is it agreed? The Honourable Deputy Premier.
I'd request the concurrence of the House to revert to the order of business notice of motion to reconsider Resolution 602.
Is it agreed? The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the unanimous consent of the House. I'll just read the therefore be it resolved. Therefore be it resolved that this House recognize the efforts of Sonia Petzel, St. Mark's Anglican Church, and other supporters to help assure Ms. Petzel can stay in Canada, and I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Question waivers, is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call the order of business public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 1, the Firefighters Compensation Act?
Bill number 1, the Firefighters Compensation Act. The Honorable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to move second reading on Bill number 1, the Firefighters Compensation Act. Firefighters, Mr. Speaker, perform a valuable service to their communities, and Nova Scotia has 550 paid firefighters in this province and 7,500 volunteers who put their lives daily on the line to protect us from the ravages of fire. In 2001 alone, there were more than 800 reported fires across the province, Mr. Speaker. These resulted in 9 deaths and 39 injuries, of which 22 were to firefighters. Firefighters not only risk their lives in the short time that they fight a fire, they also risk their long-term health. The incidence of cancer is on average 3 times higher for firefighters than for the normal population. This has been linked to plastics and other chemical-based products that are now common in homes, industrial sites, and businesses, and these are released into the air during a fire. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to report that this bill will allow for a presumption that benefits should be paid to firefighters who contract specific types of cancer under the Workers' Compensation Program. This legislation will ensure that they have the best possible insurance and health coverage available should they need it. What sets our bill apart from others is that we will make these benefits available to all firefighters, both paid and volunteer. Cancer doesn't differentiate, Mr. Speaker, from those individuals who make their living and make a career of fighting fires to those who give of their free time to protect their communities. This bill will be supported by a regulation that will detail the specific types of cancers and occupational diseases that will be covered. We are currently looking at the 5 or 6 cancers that are covered in Manitoba or under consultation in Alberta. These include brain, bladder, kidney, leukemia, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, right, and possibly colon cancer. Obviously, I'm not of the medical profession, Mr. Speaker. I forgot all that stuff. This bill provides flexibility for the Workers' Compensation Board to change and update both the types of cancers covered as the medical evidence changes, as well as setting out the employment periods for firefighters to be covered. The list can be updated from time to time, and I have asked for a further review to be conducted of other firefighters' diseases. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to point out that this same approach is the one that has been adopted by Saskatchewan in their legislation, which is presently coming before the House. With this bill, benefits for specific cancers will be expedited through the system without further anxiety to firefighters or to their families. The average coverage that most municipalities purchase for their volunteer firefighters is $30,000. Paid firefighters are usually closer to the highest insurable amount for workers' compensation, which at the present time is $41,800. There are 2,200 volunteer firefighters at the present time covered under workers' compensation. There are a large number that are covered under other private systems in cooperation with the municipalities, and there's about 100 paid firefighters who are covered under workers' compensation. The balance are covered under private systems. Mr. Speaker, I think this is good legislation. I think it's something that we should do for volunteer firefighters. As all of us are aware, firefighters are not only fight fires in our community, but they are tremendous people to have within a community to get things done. They are the spark plugs that every organization turns to when they want to get something underway. If they want to build a new library, if they want to build a new rink in the town, normally the first people on the line to help are the volunteer firefighters. Mr. Mr. Speaker, they are very, very important people, and with those few words, I'll move second reading. But before I sit down, Mr. Speaker, I would tell the honourable members that if they say, well, you're fooling around with the regulations, we're not. We have draft regulations, but I shouldn't say unfortunately, but by the manner in which we deal with regulations, they must first of all go to the Workers' Compensation Board, then they're going to come back and go to Treasury Board, and from Treasury Board to Cabinet before they become regulations. So there is a process in place. We have draft regulations, which indeed I may be persuaded to table sometime before we get into law amendments, or certainly when we are in law amendments. There's just a few. The regulations themselves, Mr. Speaker, are just one page. They're very, very simple. They list the cancers that are covered. They list the minimum period of employment and outline what a firefighter is for the benefits of the regulations. It's exactly the same for a volunteer firefighter who is applying for license plates or for coverage under the death benefit, and that person is certified by the fire chief to be an active firefighter. So, Mr. Speaker, that's all there are to the regulations. They're very simple, they're very straightforward, and we'll certainly have them available for law amendments, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I guess this is a case of the old Tilden line that when you're number two, you try harder. Because, we called Bill 2 before this House approximately 2 weeks ago, and on basically the same thing. And I listened to the minister, and the minister, is trying to cut us off at the pass and saying, we've got the regulations, and they're going through the system, and be patient, and it may come to you. But it's very important that those regulations are brought forward as soon as possible, because without them, you're really buying a pig in a poke here with this bill. Now, yeah. But now I hear the member over there saying you forgot volunteers. Has he read our bill? Has he read our bill? Read Bill 2, and you'll find volunteers are in there. And so, I mean, Mr. Speaker, as someone who represents 5 volunteer fire departments and some paid staff, I know the importance, certainly as most members do, and that's a point of clarification, Mr. Speaker. The floor is open for debate, Mr. Speaker, and certainly that but I'll tell you something. Well, what is the noise in here? That's right. Well, Mr. Speaker, what we have to look at here, there's a very, very large empty spot in the government's bill here, and that's retroactivity. Now, the purpose of retroactivity is, as the minister said when he introduced this bill, talked about the amount of firefighters, whether they be full-time paid volunteers or volunteers, that there's a certain amount that are covered under WCB and another certain amount that are covered under a private carrier paid directly by the municipality. And that's an important, because in Bill 2, we, in that bill, talk specifically about a retroactivity period. Now, why the retroactivity period? Well, pre-amalgamation in Halifax County and so on, Mr. Speaker, there was various paid departments and volunteers, and one of the paid departments, Dartmouth, had a private insurer, and the rest were either not paid or were WCB. Upon amalgamation, the HRM adopted the Dartmouth model, and they went into effect a private carrier, excluding themselves from WCB. Now, there's without the retroactivity period, there's actually 2 people out there today that have cancer, or firefighters, would fit all the criteria in this bill except retroactivity. And that's extremely important because they're not being paid, their premiums aren't being paid through WCB, so therefore they're outside the window. And as the bill clearly says, that everything comes in effect of the day this bill is passed. There's not one iota of retroactivity. So why would they do that? I mean, I heard them, the members from across the way saying, your bill didn't include volunteer firefighters. What do you got against firefighters? Well, I suppose if I wanted to be mean-spirited back, I could say, what do you have against paid volunteer firefighters or paid firefighters that have cancer? Because this is what this bill effectively does is cut those people out, saying that you have primary site cancer, but that's not good enough. Now, the minister has said to us that in his regulations, he will have such things as what the firefighter suffers from, whether it's primary site brain cancer, primary site bladder cancer, primary site kidney cancer, primary non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, or a primary leukemia, and colon cancer. Now, colon cancer, and to the minister, I've got to say that goes to a nice area, but that's good to have in there. But again, it's the retroactivity prospect of it. If the minister would look at bringing in that, I mean, that is a major part around this bill, is the idea of having it available for retroactivity, because we leave out a very large segment, and it's of great importance. We've seen various studies, the Giudice studies and the Goldberg studies, and we find, these primary cancers are ones most affected cancers that most affect many of our firefighters. But 80% of all injuries to firefighters is from smoke inhalation, and therefore that's where a lot of the diseases comes from, after taking in that probably contaminated air and some forms of oxygen deficiencies. This is what happens to some of these firefighters, and it carries on from there. So, Speaker, for the government to say that this bill addresses those needs is somewhat short, and I would say that it really doesn't make a lot of sense to me if you're going to bring this bill and take it on to law amendments and have it enacted eventually without the recognition of retroactivity. Why would you want to exclude those brave souls? It's something we all agree on. There's not one person in this House would argue the point of what the work these brave women and men do, whether it's paid or volunteer. And I got to tell you, some people will stand up and say that, about the idea that there was volunteer firefighters excluded. When you look at it in reality, the hard part about including, and the bill said they would study it, same as the Manitoba bill, was for the purpose of trying to get a call system down, Mr. Speaker, where professional firefighters have a more demanding type of schedule. When they answer a call, they have a roster, and I'm sure it's something you would probably know well yourself, speakers, is your former profession, not being a firefighter, but being in a first responder with the police service. You'd know that there's almost an incident report, and they would go out and they would, when they come back from the run, they would put down the members that answered the call and the time out and time in. Then they would go and say, they would list in the incident report the type of fire and break down the line. And so you could, from that, extrapolate fairly easy who was involved and how many runs each firefighter had to take. So you could keep a scorecard there. That was the problem we were facing looking around volunteers, was because is this going to add another layer of work to our already overburdened volunteers. You know, we just today in estimates and last week in this House, we were questioning the minister on problems besetting volunteer firefighters brigades across this province regarding insurance for their buildings and their property, and this is becoming a real problem. So now are we going to heap another line of work on them, another level of bureaucratic concern where, because the small municipalities, you know, certainly don't have the time to go and say, okay, that, you know, last night there was a fire at 1 Main Street, and the volunteer fire department from this area responded, and these 5 people were there, and so on. It's another level of bureaucracy that, you know, that we're going to put on the backs of volunteer firefighters without having any real discussion with them or with municipalities and saying, how can we implement this so these folks are covered? And that's, you know, I'm not making no excuses, Speaker, that this was taken from the Manitoba bill, and my bill, when I introduced it, Bill 2, was basically reflective of that. But, you know, we also, and I'll be glad to see when the minister brings them forward around the regulations, is the amount of time that, you know, these people will have to work in the profession before they're considered for these various illnesses and so on. Because that's, you know, an integral part of automatic assumption. And the fact that, you know, some of the wording around even, in fact, and we won't get into that today, Mr. Speaker, the clause-by-clause aspect of it, because you may shut me down. But when we get into clause by clause, we'll be talking about, I think the wording's a little weak, and that would give the board maybe, if they would feel that they have an argument to shut down the automatic assumption side of it. So we'll be talking about that at another time. But the idea of years is an important one, because, as I've said in an earlier speech, the idea of automatic assumption isn't a new idea totally to this province. I mean, we were certainly broke ground with the coal miners' automatic assumption, and so we deal with that. But here's a problem we're facing today at workers' comp over automatic assumption, and I think it's particularly vicious and particularly cruel. Before the demise of the industry in Cape Breton, there was a period for the last 3 to 4 to 5 years of downtime because of the closure of the Lingan mine, and then uncertainties of the roof strata in the Phelan mine, and kind of maintenance and work so on at the Prince mine. So there was lots of shutdowns. So there was periods of time that people weren't working, the miners were not working. So although they have a work record that shows, for the sake of argument, Mr. Speaker, they were hired in 1985 and were laid off, or hired, we'll say, in 1975 and laid off in 1999. But what the board is doing now is coming back and saying, oh, no. Well, it shows that you worked there for 23 plus years. If we start to take into effect the times that that you were on layoff, you do not meet the 20-year litmus test, which goes against, I believe, the spirit of the legislation. It's, you know, certainly, I think what we take into consideration here is that it's 20 years working. If there's no work, it's not like this person didn't go to work because they didn't want to or whatever, but they were taken into such factors as layoffs, sick days, vacation days, all these allotments, which I, you know, would have thought in the goodwill around that bill, those things were considered, and it was like from hire to when you were no longer considered an employee. But the board has taken a very, very strict vision of what 20 years is. So I would ask the minister to be cognizant of that when putting that wording forward to the board, that there's clarity there, that there's clarity that they can't fool around with that it means when the time you were hired till the time because of your injury you can no longer work. And don't be playing with minuscule numbers, because in real terms, I have coal miners in my constituency, Speaker, that are considered to have some form of lung dysfunction, but they don't miss the 20-year date because of saying, well, you're laid off for 4 months here. Now it's 19 years and 7 months, so you miss it, or 19 years and 10 months, and you miss it, so therefore you're out the door. And I don't think that was the intent of that bill, but indeed, when you look at the bill, the wording isn't strong enough to support. So what you end up doing is going into the Workers' Compensation Appeals Tribunal with these and saying, look, you know, you're arguing intent, and there's many more learned people around here that have law degrees know more about that than I do. But I'm sure it's an awful hard position to argue when you're arguing intent, unless you have the people. If you took in all 52 people that were members of the House at the time to say, do you swear that that was the intent of that bill? Because, you know, it's almost impossible. So it's extremely important that we include and make sure that that's in that bill. I want to go back for a minute too to talk about what we were looking for in Bill 2 and by way of putting everything in the bill, and just not by way of regulation, as the minister said about Bill 1, because I think, I believe him for sure when he says that he's going to bring regulations forward, and they're in the vetting process, if you will now, Mr. Speaker. But I just kind of wonder why they're not encapsulated in the bill. Why aren't they there, and for people to see and then not get tangled up in the intent sometime down the road, and we'll be arguing it somewhere with, you know, at WCAT or internal appeals with the WCB of why wasn't it in the bill? Why is it in regulations? Why is it not in the bill? And I think, you know, at some point I hope the minister will be able to answer that question directly, Speaker. You know, there's two firefighters that I mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker. One is Gary Harris, and the other is Mo Cannon, both who worked for the Halifax Fire Department here, and both suffering from cancer. And when our bill was introduced, and which is Bill 2, and the government introduced Bill 1, which was the first Friday, we sat. And on that Saturday, I got home, and there was a message for me to call Mr. Harris. And Mr. Harris is quite a unique guy. He gave his all when he worked for the fire department. He's a good community guy. He's all those things you want as a neighbor and a friend, Mr. Speaker. He's the type of guy, you know, that if you're out getting winter wood in, he'd cut it with you. And he's the type of neighbor you'd like to have and the type of friend you'd like to have. But Gary knows that he can't be that type of friend or that type of neighbor anymore, and he doesn't know how long he's going to be any of those things anymore, Mr. Speaker, because he has cancer. And he's not looking about and he's not worried about what happened to poor Gary. He's not, you know, kicking the dirt and say, why me, or anything like that. What he is saying, though, Mr. Speaker, is that I worked hard, I got paid good, and all I want is what most of us want in this province, is if something disastrous happens to me, that my family's looked after. And that's what we're looking for with the retroactivity. And if the government doesn't want to come back and treat Gary Ross or Mo Cannon with that type of fairness, then there's something fundamentally wrong with their bill. We're not talking about opening the floodgates at WCB on items, Mr. Speaker. We know basically there's a finite number we're dealing with here. And if the government would look at that in a serious way, that I think they would see that. They would see that as a fundamental piece of fairness that they should buy into and protect Gary Ross and Mo Cannon and say, look, you treated us well and we're going to treat you well. And that's all it is, Mr. Speaker. It's not somebody asking for something. They're not wanting the bar raised especially for them. They're not looking for anything that they don't deserve. They're not looking for anything that give it to me but don't give it to that person. They don't want boxes put around them, Mr. Speaker. They want this available to themselves and all their comrades, so they can go and know that if they will work as safe as they can, they'll work as safe as any Nova Scotian worker can work. But they also want to know that if through no fault of their own, that they'll be covered and their families will be looked after. Now, that's what we need here. We need a bill that would look back and help these people. I want to tell the minister that is such an important part. It's an important part of every bill, whether it's in the 21 states in the U.S., whether it's in Manitoba, or whether it's the proposed legislation by a backbencher in Alberta. I noticed the minister brought up about the Saskatchewan bill today. He's got me at a loss on that one. If I will certainly go to it and look it up after the debate. But those, each one of those look at the retroactivity aspect of it. And I applaud the minister for including colon cancer, because many of these places, colon cancer is still under study. The Giudice report still, I believe, I'm not sure, but and Goldsmith, I believe that their studies have said that while it's inconclusive, that they would certainly look at following that, and the incidents are there, but aren't as solid as the other primary site cancers. So we need government to come to the table and lay out exactly what they're going to put in their bill. And I want to go back and say, well, I respect the minister's position around his saying that he will bring the regulations forward, and possibly before we go to law amendments. That would be good. It would be a step, but I still say to the minister that we should have them enshrined in the bill, that the minister should, for, I guess the bigger picture in this bill is the best way to put it, Mr. Speaker, that they should allow us to see all these things here. Let's look at the latency periods. Let's look at, whether they're 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. Those are all, they're necessity to put in there, because they go to the Giudice Goldsmith studies, and they're considered, the benchmark throughout North America is the study around cancer and related to firefighters. And they set out these periods as long as these people have been employed. And it goes back to, I guess, before, and I'm not talking about excluding people, but that's part of the problem with tracking the volunteers. And, if we can track that, that's great. But I'm not talking about excluding, I'm just talking about what the experts have found, the problems that you'll find, what we will find when if and when this bill is passed, is finding a way to make sure that we can accurately portray the length of time people were employed as if you can be employed as a volunteer. I don't think so, but performed your duty as a volunteer, and how you can do that, how they'll be able to track that. It'll be interesting to see that one, because most studies have shown it's pretty much impossible. But if this government can do that, then my hat goes off to them. If they can do that without costing municipalities any money, all the better. And if they can do it without the expense of taxing more work on top of the already overworked volunteers in the community. Because, you know, as the minister said, that, you know, the volunteers aspect of this is interesting because they're the ones we always go to first. Whatever rural community or smaller urban areas, they're always the ones they go to first. If you're looking, you know, I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, they were active in revitalizing the rink and arena in Spring Hill. They're always involved. You know, yourself, if you want to get a parade going in your town. I remember one time when we were kids, the big thing always was if you won your high school soccer championship in the province, or if you won a baseball tournament, the big thing always was getting a ride in the fire engine. Well, that's gone for other reasons. But even if it's what they do is if you come in from a championship from somewhere, who's usually out waiting by the highway to take you through town? But the fire department. They're the most probably recognizable group. I mean, they're so recognizable that I know of that they even relied on to take Santa around. So I mean, Mr. Speaker, that's probably right up there with driving the Speaker of the House around. But nonetheless, if we can help and we can encourage,
That's right.
if we can take if we can take volunteers and put them in this bill and make this bill better, Mr. Speaker, then I'm all for it. As there's not a person, as I started out to say tonight, Mr. Speaker, there's not a person in this room tonight that disagrees with the important role, whether it's paid or volunteer firefighters in this community, from one end of the province to the other. We agree with the role they play. So I'll be taking my seat, Mr. Speaker, so I want to tell the minister that I would hope to see some changes, that we'll be looking forward when Bill goes on to law amendments. I would appreciate before that if he could get the regulations to us, it would be very good. And hopefully we can come up with a bill that will give us some retroactivity and that will look after all of our firefighters right across the province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise and speak on Bill 1, an act to provide compensation for full-time and volunteer firefighters who suffer from an occupational disease. Mr. Speaker, at the outset, I would compliment the minister for recognizing the importance of firefighters in this province, and in particular the need for volunteer firefighters and the very vital role that they play. Mr. Speaker, in my constituency, presently I have 14 volunteer fire departments with an average complement of 25 volunteer firefighters. So we can see that that's a considerable contribution, and that's spread over a 62-mile distance. And then with the redistribution taking place, I'll lose one, but I'll pick up an additional 2, so I'll be up to 15. Initially, back in 1988, Mr. Speaker, when I came to the House of Assembly here, I had 17 volunteer fire departments in my constituency. And then with some realignment, that changed. So I feel that I have a fairly good rapport with the volunteer fire departments across rural Nova Scotia as represented through my constituency. I feel that the need for volunteer firefighters is absolutely paramount in this day and age. Mr. Speaker, the minister has indicated some 8,000 volunteer firefighters and paid service firefighters in the province, of which 500 are paid, or sometimes we refer to as professional, and the other 7,500 as being volunteer. That doesn't in any way diminish the level of training or the expertise that volunteer firefighters provide.
Order, please. The honourable member for Halifax Bedford Basin.
Member, allow an introduction, please. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Bedford Basin on introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce in the East Gallery Irene Swindells, who's the National Vice President of the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada, who's joined us this evening. Irene, would you rise and receive the welcome of the House, please?
Thank you. We welcome Irene to the gallery this evening. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West, thank you, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I, too, welcome the special guest for the member for Halifax Bedford Basin. Mr. Speaker,